It's described as a hub for innovation, a place where technology meets culture, and a futuristic superstructure set to become the largest building in the world. It's called the Mukaab, and ambitious hardly scratches the surface. This enormous square skyscraper, designed to rise above the Saudi capital of Riyadh, not only matches the boldness of the kingdom's other infrastructure projects, but leaves them far behind. Yet, behind the spectacle of pomp and pageantry, advanced CGI, and groundbreaking technology, there lies one critical factor that might ultimately keep this unprecedented structure from being completed. And it's a factor that may reveal why so many Saudi megaprojects falter before they can be fully realized. For one of the most daring engineering endeavors ever attempted, its message is a literal call to be there and be square. But will this geometric giant truly transform Saudi Arabia, or is it simply a vast vanity project designed to end up in abject failure? The Mukaab stands as one of the most ambitious elements of perhaps the most daring project ever conceived. Once again, the Saudis and their fascination with geometric infrastructure are pushing boundaries. So, what is the Mukaab? Well, simply put, it's a cube. In Arabic, Mukaab literally means cube. Alongside projects like the Octagon and the Line, you can't help but admire their creative approach to naming these ventures. I mean, what's next? The Cone. Yes, it is exactly what it sounds like. It's a large cube, and if you're thinking, doesn't Saudi Arabia already have one of those? You ain't wrong, but we'll get to that a little bit later. The Mukaab is set to be a staggering 400 meters tall, wide, and long, resulting in a total volume of 64 million cubic meters. It quantifies as a skyscraper in its own right, yet once completed, it will also become the largest building in the world, surpassing the Boeing Everett factory in Washington, USA. Its interior space is so vast that it could accommodate 20 Empire State Buildings. In CGI mock-ups, it towers over everything in sight, evoking an image reminiscent of a Borg cube from Star Trek. Given its immense scale, it is expected that such a massive structure will house an incredible range of spaces. The sponsor of today's video is Squarespace, and look, big ideas deserve a big online presence, and that's what Squarespace do, and they make it super. You can have a website that looks like a super professional big company website, and no one knows it, but you made it in Squarespace in like 45 minutes. I used to say an afternoon because it took me like a few hours to build my website with their templates and the drag and drop editor. I always said it was ridiculously easy, but now they've got this AI stuff built into it. So it's like you kind of just tell it what you want. It's like, okay, done, mate. It's very good. It's very quick. It's just websites made simple. It's just the way to go. Plus, if you want to sell stuff, you can sell products, you can showcase your work. I mean, I think the example there with their website is like a photographer. So you have a portfolio and then you have a book me for your wedding or whatnot. Squarespace is just the way to do it. Plus you can sell stuff and courses and all of that stuff. It's just the best way to go. I talked about Squarespace endlessly before, and that's because it's just the best way to build a website. So go to squarespace.com/megaprojects for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, use the offer code megaprojects and you'll get 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. Thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring, and now back to today's video. So what exactly will be inside? Well, essentially everything you could ever imagine, and even several things you probably haven't thought of yet. So to kick things off, the cube will feature the world's first fully enclosed skyscraper. Yeah, a skyscraper within the skyscraper. Remember, this is Saudi Arabia we're talking about. Moreover, the skyscraper will be completely immersed inside a dome that displays holographic images aiming to transport guests to anywhere in the world. It's a concept somewhat reminiscent of the Sphere in Las Vegas, but this time it envelops an entire skyscraper. Michael Dyke, Chief Executive Officer of Murabba, which the Mukaab is part of, recently spoke to Bloomberg about this groundbreaking technology. He explained, quote, "When you're inside, you cannot see the dome. You could go to bed in the Serengeti and wake up in New York City. You can smell it, feel it, and touch it." End quote. He added that the experience could even make it seem as though you were on another planet entirely in a truly immersive way. But that's not all. Step outside the skyscraper, inside a skyscraper, and you'll discover 2 million square feet of floor space filled with commercial areas, residential units, tourist attractions, cultural landmarks, offices, hotels, open-air parks, walkways, and even racetracks for flying cars. It's designed to embrace a vertical lifestyle that maximizes every bit of urban living space. I mean, forget 2030. Those inside this cube, we're practically living in 2100. It's believed that this will be constructed using a mix of concrete, steel, and glass, much like most skyscrapers, but with a twist that goes beyond the typical giant cube design. This won't be your average run-of-the-mill glass facade that you see on stereotypical skyscrapers. Instead, the structure will be composed of overlapping triangles in an architectural style inspired by the Najd region of the kingdom. According to CGI mock-ups, the exterior is expected to look as if it was made of solid gold. In the ground clearance phase that started in 2023, 10 million meters of earth have already been excavated, and by October 2024, these groundworks were 86% complete. So now, almost halfway into 2025, it's likely that the foundation work has already begun. And believe it or not, that's still not everything. The Mukaab itself is set to become the focal point of Riyadh's new center, known as New Murabba, an element of the project that is even more ambitious in scope. New Murabba is set to become the new modern downtown of Riyadh, acting as a city within a city. Much like the line, its objective is to create a 15-minute city where everything needed by its residents can be reached within just 15 minutes of travel. It is also poised to become the world's largest downtown project, spanning a planned area of 19 square kilometers. The first phase, scheduled for completion around 2030, according to CEO Dyke, will introduce 8,000 homes designed for 35,000 residents. But the ambition certainly doesn't stop there. The fully completed downtown zone is planned to include 25% green spaces, operate solely with electric vehicles, and achieve a 35% reduction in carbon emissions, ultimately housing 400,000 people. Although no timeline has been set for the full completion beyond the initial 2030 phase, this milestone aligns with Saudi Arabia's broader plan to open up the country to the entire world. And that really just leaves one question, doesn't it? Why? Now you might be tempted to say, money. After all, you can't build a project on this scale and make nothing out of it. That would be a terrible deal for everyone involved. The cube alone is set to cost a whopping $50 billion, yet the Saudis only project it's going to bring in $48 billion. That's still a great return on investment for something so expensive, especially considering how freely the Saudis seem to spend. A $2 billion loss might be nothing more than pocket change, like losing coins in the sofa. Over the long term, however, the project may well generate even more revenue, particularly with the planned increase in tourism after 2030. It is also expected to create thousands of jobs across the entire project, though many of these positions are financed directly by the Saudi purse and likely factored into the overall valuation. So, it's not really about money, it's about status and making a statement for the future. Michael Dyke, when discussing the new downtown of the capital, expressed this sentiment. He explained, "It's masquerading as a building today," referring to the Mukaab, "but it's so much more. Ultimately, a capital city the size of Riyadh deserves to have a global central icon, as other capital cities do." End quote. When the Saudis fully open their doors to the world in 2030, they want to unveil an iconic downtown that can be showcased just like major districts in other cities around the globe. Think of Fifth Avenue in New York, the Avenue des Champs-Élysées in Paris, Westminster in London, Hollywood Boulevard in Los Angeles. Riyadh aspires to create something even bigger, even better. And the plan is for the iconic downtown not only to endure, but also to sustain itself as much as possible. The revenue generated from New Murabba will add another arrow to the Saudi Arabian quiver that isn't tied to their massive oil wealth. For a while now, the country's leader, Mohammed bin Salman, has recognized the writing on the wall regarding fossil fuels. Part of the reasoning behind these massive infrastructure projects is to wean the nation off its oil revenues, or at the very least, diversify its portfolio so that oil can be phased out, so the Saudi Arabian economy ultimately doesn't collapse. Observing the rise and fall of Venezuela, a country with even more oil reserves than Saudi Arabia, likely played a role in ensuring that the nation's future well-being isn't dependent on an ultimately volatile resource. For the Saudis, that strategy's worth every penny. Or is it? Because despite all of its incredible innovation, the Mukaab is going to face a lot of challenges in, actually being built. So, trying to build the largest building ever is bound to encounter obstacles, and some of these hurdles are enormous. In fact, some might call them 400-meter high-sized. The biggest issue facing the Mukaab right now might actually be its perception. Saudi Arabia is one of the most devoutly Muslim countries in the world. While Riyadh clearly loves its geometric megaprojects, many Saudi Muslims believe there is only room in the kingdom for one truly significant cube, the Kaaba in Mecca. The Kaaba is the holiest site in the holiest city in Islam, and it is where millions undertake pilgrimage each year during the Hajj. It is so sacred that entry is restricted only to those who adhere to Islamic teachings. The Mukaab's resemblance to Kaaba, only many times larger and adorned with ornate patterns and golden hues, makes the Kaaba appear as a mere sideshow by comparison. This structure is now seen as the true destination for pilgrimages, a notion that has understandably upset quite a few people. In fact, the Mukaab has been described as, quote, a deliberate affront and clear symbol of idolatry. Interestingly, both Mukaab and Kaaba share the same Arabic root word, which only deepens the controversy. In devout Islam, there is a common belief that its enemies will eventually present themselves not as adversaries, but disguised in the garb of Islam itself. Thus, a larger, more lavish cube that promises everything from virtual reality experiences to the extravagance of high-end shopping malls and high-rise apartments is perceived as a distraction, drawing Muslims away from their faith under the pretense of a counterfeit version of Islam. Many view this as an insult to their Almighty. In an effort to avoid the backlash altogether, Riyadh has claimed that the Mukaab is based on an entirely different concept, and we'll quote here. Riyadh's new downtown project, with the Mukaab at its heart, draws direct inspiration from the city's historic old downtown. The Mukaab is a contemporary reimagining of the Murabba Palace, which translates to Square Palace. However, this comparison doesn't really fully hold up under scrutiny. While the Murabba Palace in Riyadh is indeed named Square Palace, it is not a cube structure with identical dimensions to the Kaaba. To put it into a Christian context, it would be as if you built the largest building in the world in the shape of a golden calf right in the middle of Alabama, and then the US government claimed that it had nothing to do with Christianity, insisting that it was merely dedicated to the cultural touchstone that is Arby's. Needless to say, such a decision would irritate people. Still, the public backlash is likely the least of the Saudi government's concerns. They plan to move forward regardless, even in the face of accusations of sacrilege. Nonetheless, the Mukaab has other issues to contend with. There's real concern over the livability of a place like the Mukaab. Sure, the idea of living inside a giant cube might sound great, until you find yourself on the 85th floor of this towering structure, completely isolated from the rest of the world inside a massive enclosed environment. It could end up feeling more like inhabiting a simulation than truly living. Perhaps the Mukaab will be so vast that the absence of open-air spaces won't be particularly noticeable. However, for this project to be both worthwhile and functional, it must be filled with amenities and supported by a robust infrastructure. Despite its unprecedented size, one has to wonder, how much real space will there actually be? And there's also a very practical element to consider. Skyscrapers are often built the way they are because it's generally better if they support as little weight as possible. However, the Mukaab's cubed shape means that there will be thousands of tons of concrete, steel, and glass all stacked on top of one another. So that, add an expensive, wide roof, and that's before considering the weight on each level, which only compounds the load. Even the wiring alone, especially with the holographic dome, could add a significant amount of weight, not to mention everything else like plumbing, air conditioning, and a whole lot more. The engineering prowess required, not just to design the Mukaab, but to actually construct it, will be something the world has never seen before. How will they prevent this massive structure from caving in on itself, especially if it's intended to last for a really long time? And what's more, these massive projects don't build themselves. Riyadh needs workers to bring them to life, but the treatment of the 900 workers on site each day at ground zero of the Mukaab is not exactly ideal. Laborers, often migrant workers in Saudi Arabia, are frequently exploited, abused, and underpaid. Although Saudi law mandates that individuals work no more than 48 hours per week, reports from the Mukaab site indicate that laborers are forced to work over 60 hours per week in grueling conditions under intense heat. In addition, they face daily 3-hour unpaid bus commutes, leaving them with roughly 4 hours sleep when they finally get home. As a result, sleep-deprived workers in desert conditions operate around 250 excavators and 400 pieces of powered equipment every single day to construct a skyscraper that demands precise engineering. I mean, what could possibly go wrong there? And you also have to consider the questionable credibility of whether this giga-project will even be completed. Remember, the whole project isn't just about the cube, it's about creating a brand new downtown for Riyadh. Other huge infrastructure projects in Saudi Arabia, like the Line, have stagnated with the 2030 deadline looming. This project is so ambitious, especially from an ecological perspective, that it's hard to envision it being finished in the years leading up to the nation's 2030 goal. The project aims to allocate 25% of its area to green spaces. That's in the desert. It intends to support 100% electric vehicles, even though oil remains the nation's biggest commodity. Additionally, it plans for 90% of its trash to be sorted at source and a 35% reduction in yearly CO2 emissions. So, will New Murabba come to fruition in the way Riyadh envisions? Well, many remain skeptical about whether these lofty goals can ever be achieved. And in the center of it all stands the Mukaab, one of the most ambitious skyscrapers ever constructed. This structure requires careful thought, planning, and engineering to ensure that it does not become an environmental burden on the surrounding landscape. Its enormous, enclosed design means that vast energy resources will be necessary to maintain climate control, preventing everyone inside from succumbing to the intense heat of the Arabian sun. Such energy demands could potentially counteract the ecological benefits that the nearby city strives to achieve. Moreover, there is the daily operational challenge of supplying the enormous amount of water required for its functioning. Even though Saudi Arabia boasts the largest water desalination infrastructure in the world, water remains a scarce commodity in the desert. Without getting all of these details right, the Mukaab could turn into a structurally unsafe, expensive, and ultimately vacant gimmick, costing the state far more than it could ever benefit in return. As a result, the project demands an unparalleled level of precision and sustainable innovation. And then there's the question that many seem to have forgotten to ask. This is just one of Saudi Arabia's mega infrastructure builds, projects like The Line, the non-profit city, King Salman Energy Park, the Red Sea development projects, and countless others. But will it actually help ordinary, everyday Saudis? Not the royal family or rich tourists, but the citizenry? Well, New Murabba is set to be a city center of the future if Riyadh can pull it off. Yet Saudi Arabia is now facing a budding poverty problem, and there's a real chance that the cost of everything inside Mukaab will keep a huge proportion of the nation from ever experiencing it. And this poses a significant issue. Without a constant stream of tourists, royal family members, and wealthy Saudi citizens willing to spend both time and money there, the development could end up abandoned, much like many of China's major projects over the last generation that have since become ghost towns. It's not simply a case of build it and they will come. Riyadh must determine how these projects will elevate the lives of its citizens and lift them out of economic hardship. Until that can be achieved, the Mukaab might just resemble a giant Rubik's Cube that no one knows how to solve. Thank you for watching.